We begin tonight with a story that's already shaking political and economic circles across North America. Just in, Donald Trump has dropped what many are calling a bombshell regarding Canada's border. Now, before we rush into the noise of headlines, let's take a step back and ask the real question. What lies beneath this announcement? Because as with most political bombshells, it's not only about the border, it's about power, it's about economics. And it's about how nations weaponize borders when the economic ground beneath them starts to tremble. Trump's recent statement on Canada's border is being framed as a matter of national security. But that's the surface story. The deeper layer here is economic anxiety. You see, every time capitalism enters a period of internal tension, rising debt, stagnant wages, inflation that bites into ordinary people's paychecks, leaders look for a distraction. They point outward to the border, to the author, to shift public frustration away from Wall Street and toward whatever target will stir emotion fastest. And right now, that target seems to be the US-Canada border. Trump's sudden announcement about Canada's border didn't just ripple through political circles. It detonated across them like a well-placed explosion. It was the kind of statement designed not only to make headlines, but to seize attention, to dominate the narrative cycle, and to reframe national discourse around something emotionally charged. But here's the thing about bombshells. They're rarely about what they appear to be. When a leader like Donald Trump drops a border story seemingly out of nowhere, seasoned observers must ask the deeper question, why now? Because in politics, timing is everything. And in economics, timing often reveals the truth that words conceal. When you strip away the surface-level language of national security and border protection, what you find underneath is not a crisis of safety, but a crisis of confidence. The U.S. economy, despite its apparent strength on paper, is showing unmistakable signs of internal stress, spiraling consumer debt, ballooning government deficits, and a population increasingly disillusioned with the promise that hard work leads to prosperity. In such a moment when discontent begins to simmer, a skilled political tactician reaches for a distraction, a symbol, and few symbols are as emotionally powerful as a border. It represents control, sovereignty, protection. By invoking it, leaders can manufacture a sense of urgency while diverting public anger away from the structures that actually created the anxiety in the first place. Trump understands this dynamic instinctively. His rhetoric operates like a mirror reflecting the nation's unease, while subtly redirecting its gaze. When people are struggling to afford groceries, when rents rise faster than wages, when their faith in institutions crumbles, they start to look for someone to blame. The political trick is to make sure they never blame the system. And so rather than addressing the deep structural flaws of capitalism, the offshoring of jobs, the financialization of everything, the chronic underpayment of labor, Trump turns the national conversation toward the border, transforming economic fear into patriotic anger. It's a masterful psychological maneuver. Suddenly, the crisis feels external, manageable, and even heroic. The working-class American who has been left behind by decades of neoliberal policy is told that the problem isn't corporate greed or tax avoidance. It's what's happening on the other side of the line that divides two nations. That illusion provides a temporary emotional release, a target for frustration, and a rallying cry for loyalty. But it's also a dangerous illusion, because it leaves untouched the machinery of economic inequality grinding beneath it all. This isn't new. Throughout history, every major capitalist downturn has been accompanied by some form of scapegoating or diversion. During the Great Depression, elites blamed foreigners and radicals. In the 1970s, they blamed oil producers and unions. Today, it's the border. The pattern is almost mathematical. When internal contradictions threaten the stability of the system, leaders externalize the blame. Trump's statement about Canada's border fits that mold perfectly. It's the economic equivalent of a magician's misdirection. Look up at the flag. not down at your empty paycheck. What makes this move particularly effective is that it feels plausible. People see rising costs. They feel unsafe. They hear about global instability. And when a leader promises to protect the border, it feels like an action plan. But protecting a border won't protect an economy built on unequal exchange. It won't bring back the factories that left for cheaper labor, markets, nor will it restore the social safety nets that decades of privatization have eroded. What it will do, however, is buy time, political time, for those in power to sustain the illusion that someone is in control. And that's the hook that keeps this strategy alive. The promise of control in an uncontrollable world. Every time an economic storm gathers, leaders rediscover the usefulness of fear. Borders become metaphors for safety. Patriotism becomes a shield against criticism. And nationalism becomes the balm for class pain. But in truth, these bombshells are crafted not to protect people, but to protect systems. They are meant to channel outrage into harmless directions, to make the people shout at the border, while the real looting happens in boardrooms and financial markets. So when Trump drops a bombshell about Canada's border, don't hear it as an isolated political statement. Hear it as a symptom of a larger economic disease. Hear it as the language of a system trying to protect itself by dividing the very people it's failing. Because the louder the talk of borders becomes, the more you can be sure that something deeper and far more important is cracking beneath the surface. And that is where the real story lies, waiting for those willing to look past the noise and see the machinery of distraction for what it truly is. Trump's so-called border announcement may have sounded like a speech about sovereignty, but in reality it was a calculated economic move, one that exposes a deeper game of leverage and power. When a leader speaks about a border, the casual listener imagines patrols, fences, and security checkpoints. But in the world of global economics, a border is far more than a line on a map. It's a bargaining chip, a pressure valve, and sometimes a weapon. Trump understands this better than most politicians. His rhetoric about Canada's border isn't a spontaneous outburst. It's a signal, a coded message to both allies and adversaries that the United States intends to play hardball again in the realm of trade and economic influence. You see, when Trump talks about the border, he isn't just talking about immigration or national pride. He's talking about trade deals, tariffs, and the flow of goods that form the veins of modern capitalism. Canada is not merely a neighbor. It's America's second-largest trading partner and one of its most important suppliers of raw materials, energy, and industrial components. To threaten that relationship, even symbolically, is to remind the world that the U.S. economy can still flex its muscles, its economic theater, with very real implications. Behind every statement about protecting America's interests, there's an implicit warning. If trade doesn't favor the United States, the border becomes a tool of control. This approach mirrors what Trump did during his first term when he rewrote NAFTA into the USMCA. It wasn't a radical reinvention, it was a demonstration of dominance. It showed that the U.S. could force its partners back to the negotiating table simply through the threat of disruption. That's the same playbook unfolding again, only this time under the guise of security, and the brilliance of it, if we can call it that, lies in how it merges economics and emotion. To the public, it sounds like patriotism. To markets, it sounds like pressure. To foreign governments, it sounds like warning. It's a single statement that serves multiple purposes, each calibrated to reinforce America's position in a shifting global order. What makes this move so timely is the current global context. The economic world is not what it was 5 years ago. Bryce, nations are expanding, challenging Western dominance in trade and currency. China is cementing its role as an industrial powerhouse. Europe is divided by internal financial struggles. In this landscape, the U.S. cannot afford to appear passive. It must project strength even when that strength is more symbolic than material. And so Trump's bombshell about Canada becomes the perfect stage prop, a reminder to both domestic audiences and international observers that America can still pull the strings of its allies when necessary. But let's be clear, beneath the slogans lies something colder and more calculating. This isn't about protecting American workers. It's about protecting American capital by reshaping trade relations through intimidation. Trump reinforces a system where corporate giants hold the real power. Tariffs and border threats don't revive small-town manufacturing. They protect multinational corporations that benefit from new, more favorable trade terms. It's a form of economic nationalism that wears a working-class mask while quietly serving elite interests. And the tragedy is, it works because it plays to emotion, to nostalgia, to the yearning for a time when America seemed economically untouchable. Here's where the hook lies. Trump's border rhetoric is not only a message to foreign governments, it's a test of domestic loyalty. It says, if you question me, you're questioning America. It transforms a trade negotiation into a moral battlefield where any dissent can be framed as unpatriotic. This tactic blurs the line between economic reality and emotional allegiance, and in doing so, it consolidates political power. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about identity, about who gets to define what it means to protect a nation's interests. The genius and the danger of this strategy is that it operates in plain sight. It doesn't hide behind complex policy. It thrives on simplicity. Protect the border. Stand up to Canada. Put America first. Each phrase is short, memorable, and emotionally charged. Yet beneath them lies a world of complex economic manipulation. It's a linguistic sleight of hand designed to make working people feel defended, even as the same policies erode their long-term security. So when Trump invokes Canada's border as a matter of urgency, the deeper reality is that he's not defending territory, he's defending leverage. He's reminding the world that America's economic might is not just measured in GDP, but in its ability to unsettle, to disrupt, and to bend trade relationships to its will. This is not foreign policy. It's economic chess. And Trump, for all his bluster, knows exactly how to use the board. Each statement, each bombshell, each border crisis becomes a pawn in a much larger game. One that isn't fought on the frontier, but in the markets, the factories, and the negotiating rooms where real economic power resides. When Trump presents his border agenda as a defense of American jobs, it sounds noble, almost heroic. The image of a leader standing guard over his people's livelihoods. But peel away the layers, and what you find is not protectionism in the name of workers. It's nationalism used as camouflage for a much deeper and older economic agenda. The rhetoric of protecting American jobs has become the political sugarcoating for policies that continue to serve the same class of elites that created the economic precarity in the first place. It's a performance that draws on the pain and nostalgia of working people. Those who remember when wages could support a family, when one income could buy a home. But it never delivers on that promise. Instead, it recycles their frustration into political fuel, while the same economic machinery keeps grinding beneath them unchanged. The brilliance of this strategy lies in its simplicity. When people feel economically trapped, when they work harder each year only to fall further behind, they don't want statistics or complex policy debates. They want a villain. Nationalism provides one. It takes an invisible enemy, an economic system built on profit over people, and replaces it with a visible one, immigrants, foreign nations, or, in this case, a northern border. That shift from the abstract to the tangible is powerful because it offers emotional clarity. It gives people a place to direct their anger, even if it's the wrong target. And in that emotional misdirection, power quietly consolidates itself. Trump's message about defending the border resonates because it taps into a real wound. Decades of job loss, stagnant wages, and community decline. But those wounds weren't inflicted by Canada or by trade agreements alone. They were inflicted by corporate decisions to outsource labor, by policies that prioritize shareholder profits over worker security, by the dismantling of unions and the glorification of deregulation. The jobs didn't vanish because of outsiders. They vanished because the system was redesigned to move wealth upward. Yet by painting the issue as a border problem, Trump transforms economic exploitation into a patriotic crusade. The worker who has lost everything becomes the soldier in a cultural war rather than a victim of economic design. This is the heart of economic nationalism, the conversion of economic pain into political loyalty. It's not new. History is filled with moments when leaders have redirected class frustration into nationalist fervor. The technique works because it bypasses reason and feeds on emotion. It's easier to rally people around a flag than to explain global supply chains or the mechanics of capital flow. And Trump, whether consciously or instinctively, understands this psychological truth. Every time he speaks of protecting American workers, he's really protecting the illusion that the system itself isn't broken, that the only problem is external interference. The deeper irony is that the very corporations benefiting from Trump's border rhetoric are the same ones that cause the economic displacement he decays. They are the multinationals that shift production across borders for cheaper labor, that lobby for tax breaks, that automate entire industries without reinvesting in their workers. But because nationalism narrows the frame of vision, these realities fade into the background. The narrative becomes emotionally satisfying even as it remains economically false. And in that falsehood lies the hook, the emotional promise of restoration without the structural change that true restoration requires. Listen closely to the way Trump's language operates. Words like protect, defend, and secure evoke an almost sacred duty. They create the illusion of solidarity between the powerful and the powerless. But in truth, that solidarity is one-directional. The working class is asked to give loyalty while corporations give nothing back. The flag becomes a substitute for fairness. Patriotism replaces policy. This dynamic keeps the economic hierarchy intact while disguising it beneath the emotional fog of nationalism. And as long as that fog remains, the public will keep fighting over borders while wealth continues to cross them freely. There's something tragically effective about this strategy. It exploits the same sense of belonging that makes communities resilient, twisting it into a tool of manipulation. Workers are told that unity means obedience, that questioning the system is unpatriotic. It's a subtle form of control, a social contract rewritten in the language of fear and pride. The wealthy who actually benefit from globalization are portrayed as defenders of the nation, while those who question inequality are branded as ungrateful or even traitorous. It's a reversal of reality so complete that many people don't even see it happening. Trump's America First rhetoric thrives because it promises a moral victory in place of an economic one. It turns suffering into identity, struggle into virtue, and loss into loyalty. But beneath the slogans and the flags, the truth remains unchanged. The system still rewards profit over people. And as long as nationalism can disguise that fact, the same exploitation will persist, cloaked in the comforting colors of red, white, and blue. The border becomes not a line of defense, but a line of distraction, one drawn carefully between truth and illusion, where the real battle is never fought. Every time a political leader stands before the cameras and declares a crisis at the border, the real border that matters, the one between the wealthy and everyone else, remains invisible. It's a border built not of fences and checkpoints, but of opportunity and privilege. It divides those who own the means of production from those who sell their labor, those whose wealth grows, while they sleep from those who can't afford to. This is the border that defines modern capitalism, and yet it's the one most carefully hidden behind the noise of political theater. Trump's so-called bombshell on Canada's border is just the latest act in a long-running show that keeps the public fixated on the wrong divide. The genius of the distraction lies in its design. Borders evoke emotion, pride, fear, belonging, identity. They allow leaders to stir the public imagination with vivid images of invasion or protection. Meanwhile, the border that separates the rich from the rest doesn't evoke emotion because it's invisible. It's measured not in miles, but in money in tax breaks, offshore accounts, and loopholes carved into law by lobbyists. It's a border patrolled not by soldiers, but by accountants and lawyers. And as long as people are busy arguing about who crosses the national border, they don't notice who crosses the economic one every single day, moving billions beyond the reach of the very society that created it. Trump's rhetoric about tightening borders is effective precisely because it simplifies a complex reality. It tells struggling citizens that their hardships have a visible cause and that he, as a strong leader, can fix it with decisive action. But what he doesn't say is that the wealthiest Americans have already walled themselves off economically from the rest of the nation. They live in gated communities, move their assets across borders at the click of a mouse, and enjoy protections that ordinary workers could never dream of. While people are made to fear outsiders taking their jobs, corporations quietly ship those same jobs overseas in pursuit of cheaper labor. The border is not a barrier to capital, it's a barrier to accountability. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that this kind of rhetoric doesn't protect national interests, it protects class interests. Every time a politician sparks outrage about immigration, they're creating cover for the real transfer of power and wealth happening behind the scenes. The working class fights to defend imaginary lines while the elite redraw the economic map. It's a sleight of hands so effective that many citizens willingly join the performance waving flags while their pensions, wages, and futures are siphoned away. That's the great paradox of modern politics. The louder the talk of borders becomes, the more porous the economy grows for those at the top. Here lies the emotional hook, the painful realization that the border debate is not about security, but about hierarchy. It's about maintaining a sense of division strong enough to keep the majority distracted, divided, and disempowered. Trump's statements about Canada might seem absurd on the surface, but they serve a purpose. They remind the public that fear is a unifying force when hope is in short supply. By focusing on the external, people stop questioning the internal. They stop asking why the wealth gap has widened to historic levels, why basic necessities have become luxuries, and why the system always seems to favor the same few, no matter who holds office. The economic border that truly defines our era is one of privilege. It's why a billionaire can pay a lower tax rate than a school teacher, why corporations can pollute with impunity while citizens are fined for minor infractions, and why the market always finds a way to protect profit even when it destroys people's lives. That border is not defended by soldiers, but by ideology, by the belief that this is just how the world works. That inequality is natural and that questioning it is, nay more, dangerous. It's a border reinforced by media narratives, by political campaigns, funded by the same wealth it protects, and by a culture that equates wealth with virtue. When Trump drops a bombshell about tightening Canada's border, what he's really doing is tightening the illusion that borders matter more than systems. It's a way to keep the working class emotionally invested in a conflict that will never touch the true centers of power. And as long as the public keeps fighting over which border needs defending, the economic border, the one that determines who gets health care, education, security, and voice, remains fortified and untouched. The tragedy is that people will continue to believe these bombshells are about patriotism when in truth they are about preservation of wealth, of class, of an unequal order dressed in the language of national pride. It's not a war between nations, it's a war between realities. One reality is lived by those who have the power to move freely across every kind of border, geographic, financial, legal. The other belongs to those trapped inside invisible walls, built from policies, wages, and debt. That's the real border crisis of our time. And until it's confronted, the headlines will keep exploding with new distractions while the true divide grows wider, quieter, and more devastating every day.